to the staff for this elaborate fundraising. A lot of you were thinking, who's the bald guy, right? And they didn't hire a comic to come in and make you laugh tonight. If that were the case, then I'd show you pictures of when I was fat. But that's not going to be the case tonight. I'm going to talk about success. And the theme that we're going to talk about is the theme of the year, which is burning your ships. We all know that Cortez, at least those of us who paid attention in history class, right? We know that Cortez and his people burned their ships to show absolute commitment to their cause. And your head coach and I just talked probably about an hour ago. We decided there were things that could have happened for this team and other teams, and teams that I played on in the past, where if they had sold out and burned their ships, at least metaphorically speaking, that the results would have been different. Real quickly, I want to tell you about myself. I compete in the sport of strongman. Have anybody seen World's Strongest Man, Magnus Fair Magnuson, Bill Kazmaier? So I compete in that sport, and yeah, I'm not 6'4" and 400 pounds. It actually has weight classes now, like UFC, so there's many weight classes. I compete, and I still compete in my 50s thanks to stem cells, but I compete in the 105 kilo class. And if you don't do the conversion in your head, that's 2.204 pounds, a 231 pound class. And if you've never seen World's Strongest Man, they do some pretty crazy stuff. They carry refrigerators on their backs. Sometimes they pull 18-wheelers. That's really tough, by the way. And then sometimes they pull fire trucks, and they have a bunch of crazy stuff. There was an event we had to do just a little while back where we had to pull a 800-pound battleship chain. And every link was 80 pounds. So if you drop the link onto your fingers below, it would smash your fingers. So really, really tough stuff. But I have a coach. And that coach makes sure that I do everything the right way, and I do things in little increments. You squat and you deadlift. You don't bench press like powerlifting, but you squat and you deadlift. And those things, when I grew up, were kind of like, I grew up in the dark ages of strength and conditioning, where I was actually a baseball player. I played at Spanish Fork, the other baseball school in the state of Utah, and I digress a little bit. When I was a kid, Taylorsville baseball was a big deal. We were the other school down south. The two big baseball schools in this state then were Spanish Fork and Taylorsville, and we both knew it. And then anytime we would meet up, we had massive respect for each other, and we knew them and they knew us. So your enemies become your friends. It's kind of crazy how that works. But in my sport, the same thing happens. You go up against guys from all over the world, from Denmark, from Sweden, from Norway, and from Brazil, and at first you hate those guys. You kind of hope that something happens to them, or they screw up, or they do something really, really slow. And then as you mature, you actually figure out that you have more in common with these guys than you do your next door neighbors who all think you're crazy. So when I first hired my coach, I came from powerlifting, where we just lay down and bench press, and then you stand there and squat, or you stand there and deadlift. And he says, today we're going to do the Atlas stones. And if you don't know what the Atlas stones are, they're giant cement balls. The first one usually starts at around 300 pounds. So that's tough all by itself, and it's the worst shape possible. It's a big round ball with no handles on it. It's not like a barbell. And then the second stone is usually 25 pounds more, so it's 300, 325, 350, 375. And then as you're getting really tired, you got 1 minute to do all 5, the last stone's 400 pounds. So scientifically, it's diminishing returns. You're getting more tired as the stones get heavier. The two hardest things in the world of sports to do are to hit a Major League Baseball thrown in the 90s, a round ball with a round bat. They determine that's the very hardest thing in all sports. Coach Beckstead, would you agree with that? And then the second hardest thing, this is according to engineers, is lifting all 5 Atlas stones in 1 minute. There's less than 2,000 people in the world that can do that. Okay? I've had the pleasure of being able to do both, and that's because of my coaches. But on day 1, when we did the Atlas stones, it's okay, you don't have to clap, yeah. So on day 1, when he broke me in, it would be like breaking in with a 95-mile-per-hour fastball instead of DP. He said, we're going to lift this first stone. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it was kind of like a hazing type thing. He was going to break me in. So he turned me loose, and I could deadlift 650 pounds, so I was like, this stone would be no big deal. So I reached down and I twisted that stone around, I turned it every which way. I looked like a little baby at the beach with a beach ball, and I just couldn't even move it. I turned every shade of purple that you can think of, and then finally I threw my hands in the air, and said, "You show me how to do it." And then he pulled really close to me, like uncomfortably close to my face, and he said, "Watch, listen, and learn." So he said, "I'm going to tell you 3 things about the Atlas stones that are counterintuitive. They're going to go against your nature. You're going to think they're crazy. But the first one is," and he's showing me, he didn't have a mic in his hands, but he's showing me how to do it. And he said, "The first thing you have to do is roll the stone onto your fingers." And I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "You actually have to roll the stone on your fingers." And I was like, why would you do that? He said, "You have to commit to the stone." So, by the way, watching him roll the stone onto his fingers, I could see that there was some urgency to get that 300-pound first stone off of his fingers. But he was totally committed, right? So he burned his ships. And then I watched him pick up that stone, and then he picked the stone up, and he said, "The second counterintuitive thing you do is you put the stone in your lap, and then you take your hands off the stone, so you're squatting down like this, with a big 300-pound stone in your lap. Then you take your hands off it, and then you put them over the top. You put your hands over the top of the stone. And then the third counterintuitive thing you do is you lean back with this 300-pound stone in your hand, and you roll it up your chest, and you put it on a 44-inch platform. And then you've got 4 more stones looking at you that are 325, 350, 375, and 400, but he just did the first one. Then after he showed me that, I tried it, and he watched. He watched me roll that stone onto my fingers, and I've never felt an urgency like that. You want to get off your fingers right away, right? So I burned my ships. I did what he said. I rolled that stone up into my lap. I took my hands off it, which was nuts. Put them over the top just like he did, and leaned back with that 300-pound stone in my lap, and rolled it up my chest and put it on there. And that video can be seen on YouTube. In fact, a lot of times when a speaker is speaking, they're going to tell you, turn your phones off. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and take your phones out and go ahead and Google Russ Anderson Strongman. 3 words, Russ Anderson Strongman, and see what comes up. Nowadays, it's kind of like UFOs. If you can do something crazy, you better be able to prove it, right? So, and then the other thing you can Google, if you have ADD like I do, Google Russ Anderson fire truck. So the hardest thing I ever had to do was not Atlas stones. The hardest thing I ever had to do was I had to compete for Texas Strongest Man. So in my sport, Texas is probably the hardest state to win. And you know how Texans are, they really hate to lose. Kind of like Taylorsville baseball or Spanish short baseball, they're not used to losing. So I did a competition in Texas, Texas Strongest Man, where one of the events was a 55,000 pound, 26-ton fire truck loaded with water, and then we had to pull the darn thing 80 feet, and we had 1 minute to do it. And in my lightweight class, we had 28 competitors. The first 10, everybody failed. One guy went temporarily blind. He paralyzed his optic nerves. Half the guys were thrown up in the junipers. And then we find out real quickly, it's a small world, that they filled the truck full of water and they weren't supposed to do that. So it was more, it was heavier. And then I came up 11th. So out of those guys, I was 11th. And so I determined to myself, I burned my ship. I determined to myself, I'm either going to pull this thing or I'm going to die. So you have a harness on. They have a harness, and then the harness is hooked 80 feet away. The harness is hooked to the fire truck, and then 80 feet away, they've got a big rope. So you're pulling on a rope to keep yourself about 2 feet off the ground. And you have to pull this giant fire truck. And by the way, it's not only loaded with water like it's not supposed to be. There's 11 firefighters up there that are basically mocking everybody who's trying to pull it.
That's why she makes.
So I determined this, I'm going to pull this thing up. It's the last thing that I do. So I start pulling that thing. And if you watch on the video, Russ Anderson fire truck, you watch that video, when I got to about 10 feet, that's where everybody was failing. And I got to that point, and I was pulling as hard as I could, and I felt all this popping. It was like pop, 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 pop. And I was like, that's strange. But I pulled all my way all the way through that once I got to 10 feet, and I finished the entire way in 32 seconds. Now, I got done in 32 seconds. As soon as I finished that, I became the leader. Everybody else had failed. But after I'd shown that it could be done, every athlete after me, all of them, completed that fire truck pull because I proved that it could be done. And the same thing is true for Taylorsville baseball. You have to sell out. You have to completely believe that you're going to win. And those little teeny margins of victory, those little teeny increments are how you do it. I had a coach that showed me that if you improve every single week, if you throw a handful of peas in a bucket and you do it consistently over and over and over again, that one day you'll have a bucket full of peas. And that's what you're trying to do here. So after I pulled that fire truck and everything, I could see that everybody else completed it. It was kind of a lesson in psychology, right? Where when you're completely committed and you believe, then there's really nothing that you can't do. So I had the opportunity of training with a gentleman by the name of Kevin Ferris, who's a World's Strongest Man finalist lately, as late as last year. And Kevin and I want to do what's called the super yoke. The super yoke is kind of like the car carry. Have you ever seen the car carry? Where they literally like stand inside of the car and the engine's been removed. But it has a 3-inch bar, kind of like a squat bar, but it's a 3-inch bar. And it sits on your back, and you have to pick that up and you have to walk usually 50 feet. So the super yoke's kind of like the car carry, except it doesn't have a car frame. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But he and I this time had worked up over 900 pounds, and there's just a few hundred people on earth that can do that. We were down in Mapleton by Spanish Fork. And we flipped the coin and we decided that I would go first at 930 pounds. And so I can admit this to this group, but I was pretty nervous about it. I kind of said a prayer and said, you know, dear Lord, don't let me be hurt doing this, because sometimes when you carry a yoke that's around 850 to 900 pounds, every once in a while you'll step on a little pebble. So remember, it's your weight, around 900 pounds plus maybe 240 pounds of body weight. If you step on a pebble with that much weight, it drives it up through your shoe and into your foot, and you can be injured for weeks. So we sweep the course vigorously before we do it. I lost the foot, had to do 930 pounds. And I'm going to tell you a story about burning your ships that I really found out kind of the hard way. So I picked up the 930 pounds. As soon as I picked it up, I had auditory and visual hallucinations. So my friend's voice was distorted. It was like, come on, you got this, right? And that was really, really strange. And then everything went shades of yellow and orange. So my vision was distorted too. So you got to go 50 feet, and I carried it 25 feet. When I got to 25 feet, I thought to myself, what if it stays like this for the rest of my life? And because I'd burned my ships and I'd sold out and I was training with a world-class athlete, I said to myself, I guess we'll find out when I finish. So I carried it 930 pounds. He ran down there and hugged me, and I'm trying to recover from carrying that thing. And I nearly passed out from him hugging me and trying to recover. But I'd done it, and then right after that, he got it. And then both of us went over 1,000 pounds a month later. Which, by the way, we were two of the only humans on earth in that weight class who were carrying 1,000 pounds on our back. But the fact of the matter is, when you're around eagles, you tend to act like eagles. And conversely, when you're around turkeys, you tend to act like that too. Again, I mentioned I played for Spanish Fork, and I was gifted back in the 80s with a fastball in the mid-90s. We had 3 other pitchers who could throw really hard too. In fact, we were undefeated. And we just rolled everybody. And when that happens, when you feed yourself a steady diet of success, the danger in that is cockiness. It's that with strength, it's that way with intelligence, it's that way with money. We've all been around cocky people that are just think they're better than everybody. And in baseball and in life, that is setting yourself up for failure. Absolute failure. So you need to be around humble people, but people that are also winners. And I've noticed that myself in my life. And I encourage Taylorsville baseball to listen to your coaches. Coach Beckstead and I were talking about all the little things we could have done differently. He wishes that he would have wrestled. Yeah, did you say that? He said that. Well, I wish I would have wrestled too. And the thing that I learned from being a strength and speed coach at American Fork High School just a few years ago is the baseball players that come in there and I tell them things, I wish I would have done things differently, and I had baseball players squatting and deadlifting and doing all the things that they told me I couldn't do back in the 80s. And the football players, I was hired to train the football players. They would come, they would work hard too, and the basketball players also. But the toughest kids that I coached were those wrestlers. And we all could deal with a little bit more toughness. But I'm trying to think about the things, if I could go back in time, if that were possible, and I could change everything, I would do a few things differently. And one of the things I would do would just be more committed to my own work ethic. I would spend all that extra time throwing. I would spend all that extra time throwing long toss. I would spend extra time in the weight room learning how to be more nimble and quicker and faster and better, because that makes you a better teammate. And when you do things like that, when your teammates see you sacrificing and putting in all that extra work and effort, they're gonna do the same thing. They're gonna absolutely do the same thing. So Last year, I got invited to what's called the Ragnarok Games. The Ragnarok Games is the heaviest, hardest show in the world. It's just crazy heavy. And we wanted to take our entire family and didn't want to fly everybody on an airplane for $6,000. So we decided to load up our Toyota Sienna minivan, really sexy. Loaded up all my kids in that. We decided we would drive all the way from Sandy, Utah to Miami, Florida. Sounds like a good plan, right? Well, we consider ourselves an eternal family, and by the time we got there, I didn't like any of my kids. I was sick and tired of them. But we did get to go through Cajun country. I never got to do stuff like that when I was a kid. We went through there, we went to a great big huge gator farm, and got to see gators, got to eat spicy Cajun food, and listen to people talk in that accent, and noticed all the baseball fields all the way across America. We got to go down on the Gulf Coast, and when it was freezing cold here in the Valley of Salt Lake, got to put my feet in 80-degree warm water with powdered sugar sand. It was unbelievable, highly unusual for that. And then we got down to Miami after 3 days in a minivan. My wife, your wife, you sitting over here, said, "Hey, do you think you're going to be able to carry that 900-pound world record?" And I said, "No explicative way." I won't tell you what I said. My back was like locked into place, and I was 53 freaking years old, right? So I just said, "There's no way." So we went to the beach and threw the football around and did all the stuff that we did as a family. But deep in my mind, I was like, "Good grief, I'm going to probably fail. That was stupid to drive across the country." Well, an amazing thing happened. Being on my feet, not being in that van, I kind of loosened up a little bit. And when Saturday morning came and they sung the national anthem, they said, "You're up." So I was like, "Oh great, I get to start it off." You know, it's like the guy that went 0 for 4 that's starting off the next game, right? So right after the national anthem, I've been backstage warming up. I had 350 pounds, which is roughly the weight of a refrigerator. I carried 350, really no problem. It was a little stiff. And then I did 650 pounds, something that's normally not too hard for me. I did 650 pounds and it felt like 1,000. It just felt really, really heavy. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble. I'm going to embarrass myself. This was on pay-per-view TV in Europe. So I was going to embarrass myself in front of thousands of Europeans, right? So I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And then while I was recovering from that 650, I thought I had like 5 more minutes. They came back and said, "You got to go." I was like, "I'm not ready." They're like, "You got to go now." So that kind of ticked me off, right? That made me upset. So I went out, and if you look at my Instagram account, by the way, is one word. Go ahead and follow me. I'll follow you back. I'm going to be a Taylorsville baseball fan this year. My account is a Desert Viking Strongman, all one word, Desert Viking Strongman on Instagram. And if you look at the videos on there, the third video to the right is me at that Ragnarok Games. So I went out and I got under 900 pounds, which was the world record. And as soon as I picked it up, man, it just felt like 2,000 pounds. I got under that 900 pounds, and usually when you pick up a big yoke, you don't want to take a first big step because that 900 pounds will overwhelm you and it'll crash to the ground and you got to pick it up again. So I took a little kind of stutter step, baby step. It's kind of like an ice skater. You don't just start wide, you kind of start and then you pick up momentum. Well, I picked up momentum with that thing and I knew I probably had maybe 2 picks in me, possibly 3, but I better go at least 40 feet with the first one. So if you watch on the video, I made it 48 feet with the first one. And then there was the line for the world record, and I still had like 30 seconds to do it. I picked it up, walked it across the line, and got a world record at age 53. Nobody over age 50 in the history of this planet has ever carried 900 pounds on their back for 50 feet. And I did that because of my coaches. I did that because I have a supportive family that lets me do this crazy stuff. I've got a 400-pound stone in my front yard. It's called the Magnus Stone. A 4-time world's strongest man, Magnus Magnusson from Iceland. If you watch ESPN, you've seen him. He's a family friend of ours. He's told us we could name it that thing, and his agent said that would be okay. Well, somebody said to me, you put that stone in your front yard. What if somebody tries to steal it? And I said, well, if somebody can steal that thing, then they're better than all of us. They should turn from a life of crime and come be a world-class strongman with us. That stone's sitting in my front yard over in Sandy right now. And what we have coming up, we have in April 19th and 20th. I was telling Coach Beckstead this. We have those guys that you've seen on ESPN, Magnus Magnusson, Bill Kazmaier, Travis Ortmeyer, and a whole bunch of world-class athletes. I know this is a baseball banquet, but I'm going to get to that. Hang on. Those guys are coming to Utah along with 150 of the world's strongest men and women to St. George, April 19th and 20th at the World Strength Games. I think Coach Bexton's going to come down. He's going to see crazy, ridiculous things. He's going to see women from Finland that carry 700 pounds on their back and then go eat 2 whole pizzas. He's going to see stuff like that. And then the way I tie that, or I dove that tail in with baseball, is individuals have to do their own individual work. And then you have to be able to tie that into a team too. You know, I know that, in fact I asked Coach Bexton this, I like little ball. I like putting people on base and bunting them over and hitting behind them and manufacturing runs, you know. I'm not a head coach, but my philosophy is move people around, manufacture runs, you know. You score 5, 6, 7 runs and you have decent pitching and decent middle relief and a closer, then you can win baseball games. High school baseball is totally different, you know. There's not 162 games, there's a tenth of those, right? So it's do or die. But when I was a pitcher at Spanish Fork, a lot of times you just got away with just throwing the ball by people. And that's fine and dandy, but never really learned situational pitching. Never really learned about hitting spots like I should have. I probably should have worked on movement on my fastball and things like that. And a lot of times we don't realize that we're in the moment until years or decades later. And so I beseech you players, you baseball players, those of you that are listening, capture this right now. Take advantage of this. This is the only time you're going to get to do this in your lives. And it's your opportunity to literally be state champions. You're probably already being considered one of the contenders for state. So what you need to do is finish that. And do all the little things. Burn your ships. Burn them all the way. Burn them all the way to the ground so there's a big pile of ashes. And do everything you can do to make sure Taylorsville baseball got cottonmouth. Taylorsville baseball finishes right on top, #1. And make sure you do that. Spend time with your teammates. Build those relationships of trust. That stuff comes out for winners. You see it all the time. As I said before, eagles tend to flock with eagles, and conversely, turkeys tend to flock with turkeys. And then one last thing before I close. Make sure that you are always working on personal development. Make sure you're always trying to make yourself better. Put time aside for you. And don't just think that you're going to be a Major League Baseball player. If that happens, it happens. But use this time to build deep, meaningful relationships, both with your coaches and your teammates. You have this little tiny opportunity here, and the rest of your life to think about it. So do your very best to make that happen. And enjoy every single moment along the way. Again, my name's Russ Anderson. I appreciate it. And this year I'm going to be a big Warriors baseball fan. Thank you very much.